Let's bring in MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian, MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner, former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger, and University of Michigan professor of economics and public policy Justin Wolfers. Ken, what more do we know about this investigation? What are the subpoenas for? What are the potential crimes, et cetera?
Good morning, Anna. Well, MS Now has confirmed that this investigation is being run out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. as a special project. And in that unusual and hard-hitting video released last night, Chairman Powell said that the subpoenas threatened a criminal indictment related to his testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. And part of that testimony was about a $2.5 billion ongoing renovation of the historic Federal Reserve headquarters in downtown Washington, D.C. And in that testimony, Powell tried to push back on what he sees as misinformation about that project. Take a listen.
There's no VPI dining room. There's no new marble. We took down the old marble. We're putting it back up. We'll have to use new marble where some of the old marble broke, but there's no new. There are no special elevators. They're old elevators that have been there. There are no new water features. There's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens. Other than that, so all of the sort of inflammatory things that the media carried are either not in the current plan or just inaccurate.
Now, we don't know exactly what prosecutors believe that Powell may have misstated in that testimony, but we do know, based on the now dismissed indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, that this Justice Department is willing to bring what legal experts believe are specious and thin cases involving lying to Congress. To prove a lying charge, you don't just have to have a misstatement or a contradiction in testimony. You have to have evidence that someone acted with corrupt intent, that they meant to lie. It remains to be seen whether they have any of that evidence in this case or whether this investigation even will result in charges, Anna. But we can tell from what the stock market is doing right now that they see this as a threat to the Fed's independence.
So, Ken, you said this is run as part of a special projects team. What do we know about that team?
Not much in terms of detail, Anna, except that Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. attorney in D.C., has signed off on this. It's not clear how personally involved she is. She's been seen by a lot of observers as sort of the grown-up in the room at this Justice Department. But this case is really raising a lot of eyebrows as a potential another example of weaponization of the Justice Department, Anna.
Barrett, what is your initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, cases involving lying to Congress are pretty rare, and that's for good reason, because they're really hard to prove. Ken hit the nail on the head when he said, you have to show that the witness made these misstatements or omissions knowingly, that they actually were seeking to mislead somebody. But in addition to that, prosecutors would also have to show that they were material. You can't just, hang somebody up on something that is just a trivial detail. The misstatement or the lie has to actually matter to the listener. It has to actually have some sort of influence on them. They're very hard to bring. As Ken pointed out, we saw in the case of James Comey, not only are these cases hard to bring, they're also wildly unpopular. I think if people get the sense that the Justice Department is being used as political leverage here, right, that this is being used all in an effort to influence the Fed, I think there will be pushback. We've started seeing pushback from Congress. You might see pushback on the side of the courts, and you'll certainly see pushback in the markets, I would imagine.
Akayla, we've seen this president repeatedly try to pressure Powell publicly over interest rates. We've seen him call Powell names over and over again. What is President Trump saying now in response to this news breaking? And do we know how this case progressed behind the scenes? Because there have been a number of investigations against Trump antagonists.
Well, President Trump overnight said he knew nothing about the Justice Department's investigation into the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, but just 2 weeks ago, he said the opposite.
We're thinking about bringing a suit against Powell for incompetence, because think of it, these aren't outstanding buildings, these are small buildings. These are $4 billion more. It's going to end up costing more than $4 billion. $4 billion. It's the highest price of construction. So we're thinking about bringing a gross incompetence, what's called gross incompetence lawsuit. It's gross incompetence against Powell.
Well, Well, Anna, this moment in history is really months in the making. We've seen President Trump repeatedly call for Powell to resign. We've seen him suggest that he could fire him, but then walk back from those statements. But this is all a part of his belief that the Fed should have lowered interest rates faster and at much more drastic levels than we've seen them do. They've notably reduced interest rates now 3 times consecutively. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent advised Trump against that decision. And so this new investigation is likely a way to oust Powell without having to fire him. And his term as chair ends in May, but he notably could stay at the Fed until 2028. So this would make a way potentially for there to be a vacancy for President Trump to shape the Fed's monetary policy. But there's a very high bar that the Supreme Court has set for a Fed chair to be removed.
Justin, investors, executives, economists all like stability, right? This unprecedented clash between Trump and Powell would seem to totally undermine the idea of stability. How's the money class going to respond to this?
Very, very, very badly. So this is unprecedented. And let's cut through the legal jargon here. This was the president threatening the Fed chair with jail. He was doing it quietly. He didn't announce it. It's that the Fed chair came out and brought it out in public. Now, is this the first time a Fed chair has been threatened with jail for upsetting the president? In U.S. history, it's absolutely the first time. In global history, absolutely not. We've seen these tactics before in Argentina, Russia, Turkey, Venezuela and Zimbabwe. This is the stuff of tin pot dictators. This is the stuff that tends to precede a hyperinflation. This is the sort of story that never ends well. Now, we've seen Wall Street react badly early on, but not dramatically. And that's because of the old Trump two-step. No one knows if he's serious about this. If he's serious about it, there'll be an enormous market reaction. But they also expect the second half of the Trump two-step is the taco, that he'd back down and walk away and pretend nothing happened at all. So it's very hard to read anything from the market messages right now because what we don't know is how serious the president is about this.
And Kayla, if this is about the Fed's renovation project, remind us of the background on that and why Trump is so focused on it.
Well, President Trump asked his Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vought, to look into this renovation last summer. And it really involves 2 1930s era buildings that were approved to be renovated during Trump's first term in 2017, when he also notably nominated Powell. Those costs have now grown to more than $700 million more than originally expected. It's now at about $2.5 billion in total costs. But the president has at times misrepresented those cost overruns, including during a tour of the renovations alongside Powell last year.
It looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed. You just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's not new.
Now, Federal Housing Director Bill Pulte has been one of the people who's championed this investigation. He's also pushed for the investigation into Lisa Cook on allegations of mortgage fraud. But Powell has repeatedly denied wrongdoing. He attributes those cost overruns to inflation. And he notably last year called for an inspector general report on these renovations.
That's right. Powell himself asked the Fed's inspector general to review the project this summer, and they shared an FAQ page about the renovation that explains some of the cost overruns, stressing changes in cost of materials, more asbestos and toxic contamination than expected, and also sharing that this was the result of consultations with review agencies. Barrett, how would that fit into any potential criminal case?
Yeah, I mean, it is appropriate for DOJ to investigate if they think there are allegations of corruption, fraud, waste, abuse. All of these things are, absolutely reasons that DOJ would start an investigation. What we're seeing here, though, is that this can't be looked at in isolation. This has to be looked at in combination with the president's efforts to both privately and publicly pressure the Fed to lower interest rates, and also his efforts to fire people that historically have been protected from firing. We know this is going to be looked at by the Supreme Court later this month. They're going to hear oral arguments in the case of Lisa Cook. So we have to look at all of this in context of every effort that the president has made over the last year to control the Fed, to bend it to his will, and to really publicly exert pressure. One has to then wonder if this DOJ investigation is one more of those efforts.
Former Fed Chair Janet Yellen just told our partners over at CNBC that this is extremely chilling for the Fed's independence. And Justin, you and I recently did a whole segment explaining why central bank independence is critical. Give us the rapid fire version, if you will. When a leader meddles with their country's central bank, does it lower inflation? Does it help affordability?
Right. So the core question is, do you want monetary policy run in the best interests of the American people or in the idiosyncratic political interests of the president? We could answer that as a question of economic theory, but we know what happens when a populist strongman takes over monetary policy. We've seen this happen in Turkey. President Erdogan in Turkey, just like President Trump, has enormous self-belief, eschews all experts and believes in the value of low interest rates. Well, he tried that policy, and what happened was inflation in Turkey went from very normal rates up to over 80%, and it's now back down to something around in the mid-30s. It's a terrible, terrible outcome. This is a bad path to walk down, and it's not going to lead to anything useful, either for the American people or for President Trump's agenda. The whole thing is pointlessly destructive.